everyone, welcome again to another 360 Timmy Minisode. Except this week we're not doing the fancy opening. Let's turn off the effects and let's sit down. So, this is going to be hard because I usually make videos where I am either with a really interesting guest at the top of their game, unscripted, and I have to do some research in my head because I'm walking along. I can't really look at notes. I'm also trying to navigate the outdoors, so I have no problem with those kind of situations. I also make videos like this where I'm normally looking into a teleprompter reading off a script. On this occasion, I'm not. I'm okay at being a dad, a granddad, and dealing with all the issues of family life. I have a incredibly challenging job where I lead people and I have responsibility for budgets. Again, no problem. But at the start of this year, I started to feel unwell, and I mean upstairs. I started to become incredibly negative, and I wanted to open up about mental health. And of course, doing it on YouTube, exposing the kind of private things like that is a difficult thing to do. But the reason I wanted to do it is because when I was planning this video, I was still very much not in a happy place. But I have now kind of found a karma, and I'm sort of, I think I'm seeing the end of it now. I feel completely different. And I wanted to kind of show what I did, things I learnt to get over this. I mean, they talk about talking being a key thing. I wouldn't disagree with that, but I would say perhaps sometimes you need to talk to the right people, and I'll come on to that later. So it was an interesting weekend I've just had, actually. I talked to a friend who's been a previous guest, Ash Heathcote. He's a trainer. He does all kinds of training. He does first aid training, that being, you know, maybe you've stopped breathing, or your heart stopped, or you've broken a leg, or you've cut yourself badly. And of course, when you think about things like that, you always have first aid, you know, bandages, or, you know, airways, that kind of thing. Obviously, this is not scripted, so I'm just bumbling along here. You're seeing me how I normally am, which is quite interesting for you, I guess. But yes, when it comes to mental health, we should also think about it as first aid. And he introduced this phrase to me, mental health first aid. And I thought, crikey, I've never heard that phrase before, but you're right, it is a thing. So he trains people on that. And, you know, we had to talk about what that involves. And I've got some material I'm going to share a bit later. Kind of two ends of the spectrum. Some of the things that cause depression, a very poignant documentary, and I've also got a therapist as well who's going to, and a YouTube channel that I'd like to show a clip from. But before we get there, I just kind of first of all want to maybe describe what's happened to me this year. So you might have seen this in my very first minisode. So just again for background, 360 Timmy is about filming outdoors with interesting people in interesting places. It's not so good this time of year. The last interview I did in December, it was very cold. It's very difficult not to be sniffing or coughing in that kind of weather, or the wind going, or unexpected rain, which really doesn't work very well with the kind of interview I do. So I just thought I'd take a break from that, and I'll bring that back very soon. The weather in the UK at the moment is very wet, windy and cold, and not ideal situation to talk to people and have an interview. So for the next couple of weeks, we'll be in the studio, and I'm really super excited to do that. But I wanted to make sure I keep some content going, so I keep in touch with the people that have subscribed to me, because this channel is very new. And I actually love doing this. It's kind of a therapy in itself. I'll again explain a bit more about that later. But I started doing the minisodes, and you'll see in my first episode, I talk about Blue January. I talk about Blue January a lot, and it seems to be a theme. I'm looking for my videos the last couple of weeks. I keep talking about it being dark and dull. So we're in the midst of January. We've just passed Blue Monday, the most miserable time of the year. And I have suffered for many years, I guess since probably 8 or 9, I realised this, the age, those ages, with SAD syndrome, seasonally affective disorder. And it goes to show you, actually, whilst researching this video, I looked up the symptoms of SAD, and I thought I had a kind of a broader depression. But the symptoms of SAD are negative thoughts, feelings of guilt, disturbed sleep, fatigue, sometimes overeating. I didn't really have that so much. Difficulty concentrating and memory, finding it difficult to spend time around others. Now, I wanted to, but something inside me said I didn't want to, and I kept wrestling with that. I had all kinds of issues with that. And it's interesting, look at these symptoms. I think that is actually literally what the problem was. And it's an existence thing that I have. I've never really suffered quite so bad as I have this year with it. And, on top of that, I'm approaching a certain age, 50 years next year. And it's a bit of an anniversary this year. I've been in my job for nearly 10 years. It's also nearly 10 years since a kind of family tragedy, and it's playing on my mind, I guess. On top of that, there's been a few deaths and that's kind of played on my mind as well. Again, approaching a certain age, you kind of think, well, the time you got left and everything. And normally it doesn't bother me, but it has this time around. So, as I said, I thought that it was quite a severe depression, but maybe it was just sad. Now, the reason I want to talk about all this is not necessarily just to say, oh, poor me, it's more what I've learned, because when I started thinking about doing this video last week, I still was very much in the negative phase. I have to say, after the weekend and a few steps, I actually think I'm now on the other side of it, and I'm actually feeling a lot better already. And we're getting closer to the end of this horrible winter period. February is almost over, so possibly that's helping me as well. So what did I learn? As they always say, make sure you talk to others, because that is super important. But I think I'd say you have to talk to the right people, and it is about talking and maybe the other person listening more, because I found some people I talk to, they like to then talk back and give examples of different people, and I kind of lock down when that happens. It's more a kind of a practical advice, short responses, I think. But it sounds bad, because obviously you've got friends and family out there who are concerned about you. I did do the thing of, are you okay? And I'd say, oh, yeah, it's all good. And it wasn't. I also did sometimes where people really noticed, are you okay? And I actually did, for the first time, go, no, I'm not, actually. I didn't let it really affect me particularly. You'll see I still carried on with doing the videos. I literally had 1 week, the first week of where it was really bad, I didn't sleep for 3 days on the trot. That was the worst week. And the key thing here was I was overthinking everything. I was thinking about social situations, friendships. I was doubting everything. I was getting paranoid about social media. I've had a few issues being a YouTuber with social media that have affected me a little bit. I'm teaching myself not to be bothered by those kind of things, because broadly speaking, when you're not putting yourself out there, your social media interactions are with your friends and your family. But when you start introducing third parties, it gets a little bit difficult sometimes. I've not really had particularly trolling or anything like that, but just things I've had to deal with and understand. And also, I'm beginning to realize that I'm obviously from a particular generation. I look at social media slightly different from others. Social interactions of people today are slightly different, particularly those that have gone through the COVID period. And I'm finding that they think about things in a completely different way. So I'm having to learn and adjust. And obviously this helps me a bit, because I do manage people at work. I work with all kinds of ages and backgrounds in my work, in my home life. So it's all useful. So I'd just say, really, I'm coming out the other side of a negative experience, and I'm learning some lessons. And that's really what I wanted to say in these videos. I think also kind of key things are to talk, but not to message. Where I've tried to do things by text, WhatsApp, it's gone horribly bad. I've actually made situations incredibly worse by doing that, because when you type out paragraphs as text, as I do, to try and explain stuff, it can be read one way or the other. And I've actually found that, look, can I just talk to you? Have you got 10 minutes just to talk to me, just so I can explain this and give a bit more context, see my face, see my reaction? It certainly helps. So don't get yourself into the social media and texting world. Just talk, drop those phones, get some proper FaceTime with your friends and with all kinds of people. I mentioned earlier, finding the right people, get some different backgrounds. I wouldn't say that any one person that I talked to wasn't useful, and I don't want anyone that obviously knows me and had talked to me during this period to think, oh, that was a waste of time. It wasn't. It's just obviously something in my head clicked, and resolved it in the last weekend, talking to a variety of people. It wasn't one particular person, but I do appreciate, I have to say, I had a colleague reach out to me at work and just say, are you all right? And that was a great chat. And I wouldn't have even thought about approaching this colleague and friend. But that helped. And, people in my social circle locally, I talked to before the weekend as well, and I felt a lot better about things. And, I can't say it was one particular issue that we talked about, one particular focus. And of course, the other thing to say is when you start talking to people about how you are, and it goes on for days, you start thinking, oh, I'm just coming across as a dark cloud, like an Eeyore kind of character. I'm always moaning, I'm not happy, or who wants to talk to Tim because he's always just going on about how bad he feels and all that. So you kind of get a bit of guilt. You A, are burdening people, and B, that you're just going on all the time, and they've maybe got a bit of a idea that you're normally quite solid. You can be quite resilient. You're always a happy chap. Why suddenly you're doing all this or this? Oh, you've gone down in my estimations. And I certainly felt like that the minute I opened up. I would say the kind of personal stuff. I thought, oh, are they ever going to look at me ever the same way again because of all this? So you start going down, an overthinking thing. Overthinking, right. Now, this is a key thing. Yes, that has certainly been a theme. I'm looking again at the symptoms of SAD, and that certainly seems to be negative thoughts, feeling of guilt. Yes, that is just looking at every situation and going, oh, I didn't handle that very well, or I should have done that better, overthinking. So the first video I'm going to show you, I started watching a few videos on YouTube again to kind of help me. Emma McAdam, Therapy in a Nutshell. And this is a great video on how to stop overthinking.
Hey, Emma, why are you pulling that rope? Have you ever tried pushing one? Ah. All right, guys, so sorry for the bad joke, but thank you for letting me reminisce on my days as a camp counselor for a second. And this rope has something to teach us about our anxiety and our anxious thoughts. Now, I once had a client who was a ballerina, and she was a really good one too. She would perform at top levels, but she struggled with anxiety. When roles for the next production were about to be announced, she would worry and worry about what part she would be given. And she would wonder if she would get the lead. And she would ruminate over any past mistakes that she'd made. And she'd wonder if she'd messed up so much that they'd give the lead to someone else. And she'd think about everything she'd said to the production manager. And she'd wonder if there was anything she'd said that'd been offensive. And she also tried to predict which roles every dancer would get. So she'd think about every single dancer in her troupe, and she'd imagine their strengths. And in her head, she'd imagine like 100 different roles, and she'd place them all in their positions. And then she would compare herself to them, initially only noticing like all of their skills and highlighting all of her own flaws. And then she'd flip and she'd obsess over her own abilities and then highlight all of their flaws. And she would literally obsess over this for hours, for days leading up to like when the role decisions were made. And this interfered with her ability to relax, to hang out with friends, or to finish her schoolwork. So she felt stressed and confused. She couldn't figure out if she was amazing or awful. She couldn't figure out if she was confident or insecure. And she knew that she like had to be confident. So if a fearful thought came up, she'd like struggle against it and like try to force it out of her head with positive thinking or with another round of obsessing over who would get each role. And the more she tried to like think positive, the more stressed out she became, and the more time she spent inside of her head, and the more anxious she was. She stopped seeing her friends, and she became more depressed. And it seemed like the harder she tried, the worse things got. So by the time she came to see me, she was ready to quit ballet. So here's the problem that many of us get trapped in. Most of us at some point in our lives get stuck in our thoughts. We like ruminate or we obsess over situations, whether it's the dumb thing we said the other night or the upcoming performance we need to do. So if we have a thought like, oh, I'm such a loser, then we just believe that thought without question. Or we engage in like a wrestle with our thoughts, trying to like force them to be positive and trying to prevent pop-in thoughts from happening. Like, oh, I can't think that way. I can't think that thought. Or we fear our thoughts. We're afraid of them. We judge them. We demand that they change. But the problem is that the more we try to force our thoughts to change, the louder they become. And worse, when we're putting tons of energy into struggling with thoughts, we get sidetracked from what we really value in life.
So I found Emma's videos very useful indeed. And overthinking is obviously a key aspect, I think, of some of what I've learned over the last couple of weeks. Just every tiny little thing processing in your mind. Like, you imagine like spinning plates, and you just gradually end up spinning so many plates, they all come crashing down eventually. And it's a bit of a show, isn't it? So I found watching videos like Emma's very useful. I also started listening to audiobooks. I listen to stories instead of listening to music all the time. Maybe certainly when I'm driving in the car, because that's one of the key things for me with SAD syndrome is I get up quite early to go to work, about 4:30, and it's dark. It's very dark, and you almost have the I'm going to work in the dark, I'm coming home in the dark thing going on. So I'm often in the car in those dark periods, and I quite like that. It's my little kind of cocoon, I suppose you could call it, where I can have my coffee. It's nice and warm. I can listen to what I want. When I go in the train, I find I have trouble listening to streaming stuff because it goes into tunnels, all that sort of stuff, and you've got people nudging you and you're having to walk through the tube and all that. So I prefer driving. And I also started listening to some self-help books. Now, one of the things that I did start to pull out is maybe all my social issues that I've been having are all to do with my childhood. And I was an only child. I travelled a lot. I had to make friends very quickly when I was younger, but I never kind of made friends that I stayed in contact with for a long period of time. I have remade contact with lots of friends I went to school with when I was out in Germany, as an example, but I haven't stayed in constant contact, where maybe people in the UK who went to primary school, secondary school, lived in the same town, they've had relationships all the way through. And I kept trying to tear that apart. Is that the issue? I read a book called Attached by Dr. Amir Levine and Rachel Heller, which was quite useful. I listened to it, sorry. Now, the only problem I had with that was it's very focused around romantic relationships, not necessarily friendships. But some of the concepts it talks about I found very useful, and it was a kind of therapy. It wasn't the answer. It certainly wasn't the answer. But, all part of the mix, all part of the first aid kit, so to speak. Now, I'm going to go a bit negative now, and I am going to put a trigger warning on this because it does discuss suicide. Now, one of the things I will say is that was never on the cards for me, it never will be, but that ultimately can be a thing that people go to when they get so depressed. And it's kind of interesting. I've done interviews on my podcast with showbiz reporters and things like that, and being in the public eye, actors. And I came across a story called My Brother David. Now, I vaguely remember all this because it was the start of EastEnders in 1985. One of the original actors on it had a very bumpy ride with the media, and it ended tragically. I'll play the opening of the video for a bit more context.
On the 27th of April 1988, David Scarborough's body was found at the bottom of these cliffs at Beachy Head in Sussex. He was my brother. I'm Simon. The newspapers reported David's death because he was famous for playing Mark Fowler in Eastenders. But if David is only to be remembered by what the press said about him, it would paint an unfair and untrue picture.
Now, I found myself watching this, and it sounds really bad to say this, but it kind of helped me a little bit because it helped me understand how events can trigger people and push them into depression and into really tragic conclusion, if you call it a conclusion, really tragic events around this documentary. How brave is David's brother as well to present this, and it was obviously made quite a few years ago. I really would love to find out what's happened to the family after that.
They didn't say that they were reporters from the News of the World. They said they were freelance writers who wanted to do a story for a teenage magazine because they'd heard David was going to form a band. And David said to him, well, that's not true. I don't know where you got that story from. There's nothing in it. And that was the end of the conversation as far as David was concerned. But then, of course, they started asking questions like, how are you feeling now? And he said, all right. And they kept on saying, how are you feeling? Are you doing anything? How's your career going? And I realised, this was a matter of a minute or so, I realised who they were. And I said, I think you better go now. And they still carry on talking as you're shutting the front door. They never give up.
The press were parked down the end of the road in their cars, and they'd stopped kids down the end of the road, see if they would say anything about David. They were in the local shop, see if they could get any form of story out of anybody.
The press were coming in droves, pumping us for information. The constant sort of fear of, God, are we going to say something we shouldn't, or, are we going to be misquoted? But we were surprised at the tactics of the reporters.
He tried to ask various questions. I said, I don't really know. I said, he's only a customer in the pub, Comes in, I said, that's it. But then, when they started hanging around for 2 or 3 days, I knew that they was after other things, because in the meantime I'd heard that David had been into hospital. And I realised the devious methods they was trying to get people and me to say things which we didn't know anything about.
In the end, I had to say, look, enough is enough. We don't know anything. Please leave the shop. And at the time, there was about 9 of them in here when I said that.
They were using massive telephoto lenses pointed at every room in the house, especially David's. He daren't come near the window or move around in his own room. That went on for 2 weeks.
They kept knocking on the door for an interview, and David couldn't even answer the door in case it was them that rang. Then they'd phone and say, have you spoken to David? Will he do an interview? I just kept saying no.
At the end of January, the News of the World printed,
Eastender Mark in suicide bid. Weirdo David, 19, who plays Pauline and Arthur Fowler's mixed-up son Mark, scribbled a suicide note during an all-night drink and drugs binge in his bedroom at his parents' home.
David just broke down, crying.
He is known as Dracula in Tatsfield because, villagers claim, he is as white as a sheet and only comes out after dark.
They could see that he was ill. Their representative, their reporters could see it. They must have known what they was doing to him. They just must have known it.
I think it just goes to show how, certainly in the public eye, we don't take care of young people very well. Maybe it's changing now. That was a long time ago, but the newspapers have a lot to answer for in that particular case. And we still see this going on today. Lots of cases of stories that are untrue or taken from a certain perspective, and it takes someone over the edge, and it's tragic. So I'd encourage you to watch that video. Obviously, this is an unscripted video. It sounds like I'm rambling, maybe. You see, I'm overthinking now. I'm overthinking on this video. I wanted to kind of just open up unscripted, and I've now started rambling, maybe because I've run out of things to say. But in summary, what I learned: make sure you talk. It's the cliche, but it's absolutely true. But make sure you talk to the right people. Don't be afraid to say, it's not helping me talking to you at the moment. Some of it is, but I just want you to listen to me, maybe. I think that's a key one. Time does help as well. Allow your injury to heal itself. Like having a cold or a sprained ankle, time heals those things. You start to feel better. So maybe add a bit more medicine, listen to books, do something different, make sure you go out, make sure you, as I said, one of my symptoms was avoiding social situations. I was feeling physically sick every time I went to the gym. I love going there. I was feeling physically sick if I had to go and meet anyone at the pub as well. I just felt, I wasn't physically sick, but I felt like it. I felt I had butterflies kind of thing. And a couple of times going to the gym, I think I walked to the door and then took a walk around the car park and went back in again. Bizarre, because when I got in there, I still interacted with people just as I would, but I was permanently on edge. I just can't explain it. It's completely irrational behaviour. And, when you start getting better, maybe feelings of guilt come in your mind. How have I seemed to people in the last couple of weeks? But don't overthink. That's the thing. That was what was perpetual all the way through. So as you're getting better, don't start feeling guilty about how you've been over the last couple of weeks and all apologetic. So talk, listen, don't avoid situations, read, try different things, eat well, and try and exercise. They're all things that help me. And be assured that hopefully you will find a path through your mental health issue, and it's temporary sometimes. I know people suffer long term with depression. I'm no psychologist, but with me, this particular phase of the year, I always have a little bit of trouble. But this year, more than ever, it's really affected me. I don't know. As I said, I don't know why. Let's see where we get to next year. As I said, I've got a very big birthday celebration early next year. Maybe that will be a better year for me, and I'll have a better outlook. It's also, quite frankly, let's look at where we are in the world at the moment. We've got 2 wars currently on, all kinds of talk of World War III. You turn the media on, it's all about the cost of living crisis. It's just bad news everywhere, isn't it? And then you're thundering over the roads, getting your cars going into potholes and your tyres bursting. It's all rubbish at the moment, but we've got to see the positive side. There is a way through it. There always is. When you look back in history, we've had all kinds of issues and wars, and eventually they're old news. And it's, as they used to say, news becomes tomorrow's chip paper. And maybe your mental health issues, you can think of the same way. It's a nasty headline 1 minute, but the next day you're wrapping your chips up in it. Do people do that anymore? I don't think they do they? That's very old of me to say that as well. It's all health and safety now, isn't it? No newsprint with your chips. There's an old thing. That's enough of me rambling. I think it's time for me to get back to normal. Thanks for watching. Well, a very different episode, but we're back to normal now. I hope you like it. If you did like this video, please like and subscribe. It does help the channel. As ever, if you'd like to reach out, please contact me on 360timmy.com. Otherwise, you have a super day.